His Excellency Ato Ahmed Bito, the Ministry of Industry, Federal Republic of Ethiopia, His Excellency Ato Ahmed Shide, State Minister of Finance and Economic Cooperation, Government of Ethiopia, His Excellency Mr. Lee Yong, Director General of UNIDO, Honorable Ministers, members of the Diplomatic Corps, and colleagues from partner international organizations, and ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. My name is Gabriel Negatu of the African Development Bank, and I wish to start by noting that I'm indeed honored to participate in this first gathering of the first International Agro-Industry Forum on behalf of the African Development Bank Group. I wish to first convey the warm greetings of Dr. Akiwumi Adesina, President of the African Development Bank, to the government and people of Ethiopia, as well as the organizers and participants here present. He had very much wanted to join this forum in person, but was unable due to prior commitments. Ladies and gentlemen, ending poverty and overcoming hunger and food insecurity are the first and second Sustainable Development Goals, as endorsed last September by the United Nations. This commitment is also underscored by the African Union's Agenda 2063 that recognizes the right of all Africans to be well-nourished and lead healthy and productive lives. Furthermore, the Comprehensive African Agriculture Development Program, or CAADP, as well as the 2014 Malabo Declarations, highlight that structural transformation of agriculture, African agriculture, is central to growth and poverty eradication in the continent. Consistent with these goals, agricultural transformation and industrialization are at the heart of the African Development Bank's priorities, as identified by the bank's high fives, namely to light up and power Africa, to feed Africa, to industrialize Africa, to integrate Africa, and to improve the quality of life for the people of Africa. Through a relentless pursuit of these priorities, the African Development Bank is on course to reverse the paradox of a rich Africa and impoverished Africans. Like many of you around this room, I firmly believe there's no reason for Africa to be a net importer of food. I also believe that it is time for Africa to feed itself. Today, our continent spends about 35 billion USD annually on food imports. If nothing is done, this figure is expected to rise to over $110 billion by 2025. That's less than 10 years, due to increased food demand and changing consumption habits. Now, at a first glance, this may seem like a tall order. Africa feeding itself may seem like a tall order. However, the challenge of leadership in Africa is to embrace this imperative and single-mindedly pursue the implementation of this principle, guided by the notion that to be great, Africa cannot be small. To be great, Ethiopia cannot be small. As African countries face new challenges from declining commodity prices and fluctuating currencies, the macroeconomic and fiscal pressure of food importation becomes ever more unsustainable. Dependency on food imports is depressing our currencies and driving up inflation, while causing huge unemployment in rural areas, particularly among the youth. Ladies and gentlemen, for far too long, our continent has produced what it does not consume and consumed what it does not produce. You will agree with me that this must stop, and it must stop now. Working together as government, as private sector, as civil society and development partners, we can make real the vision of a vibrant African agro-industrial sector. We can realize the vision of Africa exporting specialized coffee with a distinctly African aroma instead of exporting coffee beans. We can arrest the export of raw cotton lints in favor of exporting finished textile, to mention just a few examples. The remarkable market progress of Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania, and Ghana in the global horticulture industry shows that smart policies, affordable financing, and infrastructure support can help Africa climb to the top of the global food value chains. And when the African Development Bank prioritizes the industrialization of Africa, this is precisely what we want to help our member countries to achieve. Within the framework of the high fives I mentioned earlier, the ADB will drive the Feed Africa agenda, with a major focus on transforming agriculture into a business for farmers across the continent. Since the Dakar High-Level Conference of 2015 on agricultural transformation in Africa, the bank has spent enormous amount of time and resource in building a regional coalition of countries and institutions for action. Never before has Africa's political will and drive for decisive action to transform agriculture been stronger. African ministers of finance, ministers of agriculture, as well as central bank governors agree that the case for agriculture transformation is strong and the time is now to transform agriculture into a wealth-creating sector. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the African Development Bank shares the Growth and Transformation Plan's vision of transforming Ethiopia into an industrialized middle-income country by 2025. Amongst others, this is achieved through pursuing aggressive measures towards rapid industrialization and structural transformation. The bank's new country strategy for Ethiopia, covering the period 2016 to 2020, will align and facilitate attainment of the GTP's objectives by continuing to focus on infrastructure development and promoting economic governance, with particular emphasis on facilitating effective and efficient delivery of basic services at the local level and the business enabling environment for private sector development. By aligning our support with the GDP, the pillars in our new country strategy are consistent with the objective of the bank's 10-year strategy, as well as the high five priorities. The two focus areas have a strong linkage with agriculture, industry, and poverty reduction. Focusing on infrastructure and governance is also consistent with the bank's own priorities. Ethiopia's indicative allocation, financial allocation, during this period is assumed to be in the neighborhood of $850 million US. Additional resources are also expected from the African Development Fund regional operations envelope, the African Development Bank's private sector window, as well as special funds managed by the bank and from other parallel and co-financiers. As the private sector is a major force in Ethiopia's industrialization and job creation agenda, the main thrust of the bank's operation will support the establishment and effective use of integrated agro-industrial parks. These parks will link producers and SMEs with strategic industrial clusters along the value chain, including scaling up of agricultural commodity exchanges. During this CSP period, the bank intends to strengthen its support to the private sector in Ethiopia by addressing the challenges of access to finance. However, I should note that there is still a lot of work to be done to improve the environment for greater private sector investment in the agro-industrial sector in Ethiopia. The development of value chains drives profitability in agriculture. Consequently, fiscal incentives are needed to attract the private sector to invest in agro-allied industries. This must be done in a manner that will provide farmers access to market, stabilize market prices, reduce post-harvest losses, and add value to agricultural production. We must also invest in the youth to attract them to the agricultural sector. The higher the share of youth and educated people in the agriculture sector, the faster the sector will grow and the higher will be its profitability. The African Development Bank is already leading the development of a continent-wide effort to get younger and better educated youth into agriculture as a business. Agriculture as a business. The bank's flagship program, the Enable Youth Initiative, which currently has enlisted interest from over 30 African countries, will help support the emergence of a new generation of young commercial farmers and agribusiness. Dear colleagues, Africa must feed Africa. And the African Development Bank stands ready to fully support member countries to do precisely that. Africa must develop itself with pride. And there's no pride of place for an Africa unable to feed itself. In this regard, I'm pleased to inform you that the African Development Bank plans to invest $24 billion or $2.4 billion per year over the next 10 years to help drive agricultural transformation in the continent. This is a big deal for Africa. It is a game changer for Africa. It will represent a 400% increase in financing to the agriculture sector by the African Development Bank. But we cannot do this alone. We will, out of necessity, forge strong alliances and partnerships with like-minded institutions to achieve this goal. The new Feed Africa Agricultural Transformation Strategy, recently adopted by the ADB, is directed at supporting African countries to achieve the modernization of their agriculture sector, to turn agriculture into a profitable business across Africa. The creation of agro-industrial parks, otherwise known as agropoles, is a key instrument for transforming Africa's agriculture sector and the overall economic transformation of the continent. This ambitious objective demands mobilization of significant resources, both domestic and external, public and private. The bank is happy to note that the government of Ethiopia continues to demonstrate strong ownership and commitment to investing its own public resources to this initiative, and calls on development partners the private sector, and others to wholeheartedly support this noble initiative. The African Development Bank, more than any other institution, understands that finance matters, that finance is the catalyst for growth. Therefore, the ADB will support the establishment of private sector-led innovative financing and risk-sharing instruments, which hold great promise to mobilize and crowd in private capital for investment in initiatives such as the agro-industrial parks in Ethiopia. Moreover, the African Development Bank, your bank, is working on creating agricultural risk-sharing mechanisms to allow commercial banks and other financial institutions to lend at scale to agricultural value chains. These and other new innovative products and instruments will make African agriculture more attractive to investors by helping de-risk investments upstream in the investment process. We will support the government of Ethiopia in establishing these agro-industrial parks by using our already existing in-house financing instruments such as equity, debt, guarantees, and trade finance instruments. Moreover, we will further leverage innovative de-risking mechanisms and our strength as a convener, connector, and catalyzer to crowd in other development finance institutions. I wish to conclude by noting that since the beginning of the bank's operations in Ethiopia in 1975, the country has been one of the leading beneficiaries of the bank's concessionary resources. The bank's commitment to investment in agro-industries is yet another milestone in the long relationship between the government and peoples of Ethiopia and the African Development Bank. I take this opportunity, Mr. Chairman, to salute the efforts of the government of Ethiopia and the United Nations Industrial Development Organizations for steering the Integrated Agro-Investment Parks initiative to the stage. The bank is happy to note that the major objective of our gathering today is to mobilize funding and attract potential investors to unleash Ethiopia's investment potential and materialize the vision of an agro-industrial development. For its part, the African Development Bank, in partnership with others, remains committed to Ethiopia's overall economic and development efforts by supporting both the public and private sectors in a systematic and comprehensive manner through regular and innovative financing instruments. I thank you very much for your attention.